Okay. Again, welcome you all to this exciting panel discussion sessions. And for those of you who remember what we planned for last year's CRC at Arizona State, we initially wanted to offer this session at the Arizona State CRC conference. But okay, if you could mute your microphone, I would really appreciate it, right? But because of the COVID-19, we have decided to cancel it. So we are super excited to offer this time in a virtual environment. Before we start this panel discussion, our CRC chair, Dr. Min Lu, is here with us. So she's going to give us an opening remark. Min?
Yes, thank you very much, David. Actually, I'm the past CRC chair as yesterday. Okay. Hello, everyone. Very welcome to this panel discussion. My name is Min Liu from North Carolina State University. So let me give you a little bit of background of this panel discussion. The idea of having this panel discussion started 3 years ago when Professor David Jeong identified a fake conference on website in construction field. He brought this up to the attention of the CRC XCOM. I called him and discussed about the idea of running a workshop on how to avoid predatory journals and fake conference to protect scholarship and reputation. We thought this would be very beneficial to our community, especially for PhD students, postdocs, junior faculty, or someone just started or in the early stage of his or her career. Talking about this can help them to avoid pitfalls, save their precious time to focus on the things really matter. More importantly, if as a community, we talk about this openly, then we can work together to prevent unethical events. So Dr. Jeong collaborated with Professor Chema de la Garza, the chief editor of ASCE Journal of Construction, Engineering and Management, Professor Kwak, the chief editor of ASCE Journal of Management in Engineering, and Professor Carrie Dosick, associate editor of Construction Management Economics, to form the panel. This is the best panel we can ever have, as they're all the leaders in the top 3 journals in our construction field. As David mentioned, we planned to have the workshop last year, but we had to cancel it because of COVID. So we're very happy we get the opportunity to do it this time. I want to thank Professor David Jeong for his vigilance, leadership, and perseverance to our community. I also want to thank Professor Chema de la Garza, Kwak, and Carrie Dosick for taking time out of their busy schedule to share their precious insights and experience with us. So without further ado, let's get started. Thank you, David. Back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Min, for your such a nice welcoming remarks. And we also like to thank you for your such a excellent leadership as a CRC chair for the past 3 years. Since you have provided nice introduction of our panel members already, so I'm going to skip that part. So basically, I'm going to work as a speaker and a moderator for this panel discussions. And as Min just introduced all of our panel members to you, these are the right people to address this issue because they have years of experience as a chief editor of our major journals, and they are well-respected scholars in our fields. So what we're going to do today is each of us is going to give a short presentation on some relevant topics on research publication ethics. And we're going to open up for question and answer sessions and take questions from you, and we'll have some meaningful discussions all together as a CRC community. And since we have a lot of people in our audience, I'm hoping that many of them are postdocs and the PhD students, because I believe that they are the people who will benefit most from this panel discussion session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use our chat box at the bottom and type in your questions. And after our presentations are over, we will go through those questions and have some conversation and discussions with our panelists. So I'm going to go first, and I will specifically talk about the problems and danger that we have with these predatory publishers. So we all understand that a publication is very important for us, right? New knowledge creation and new knowledge dissemination through publication are really our job responsibilities, and this is a really important indicator to measure the performance of our research. For most of us, it's not really a big deal because we are well trained and we are aware of those ethical issues associated with like this plagiarism and the integrity of authorship and the problems that we have when you're going to publish your research in the predatory journals. But I have realized that that's not always the case, especially for rookie researchers like our graduate students and the junior faculty members, and this growing pressure on publications. And I also think that the recent trend of quantity-driven performance evaluation in academia, like the number of publications and the dollar amount of research funding, have somehow exacerbated the situation and increased the risk of our junior faculty members and the PhD students to commit to this unethical research behavior and fall victims of it. So I assume that probably all of you receive these phishing emails pretty much on a regular basis. So I'm showing you some of the emails that I got. So I got this conference chair invitation and keynote speaker offer from a conference that I've never heard of. And their research area basically is completely different from mine. But if I accept this invitation, if I pay the fee, I will get the honor of the conference chair or the keynote speaker. They don't know me, I don't know them, but they are sending these emails on a pretty much random basis using the web scraping technologies, so they can quickly obtain our email addresses. I also received a guaranteed publication offer from a publisher that I have never heard of, but I have to submit my manuscript in just 2 weeks. Then they will accept my paper and they will publish it with the research, with the official publication in this journal. Also, I have received a research award offer from a publisher, and they figured out that I have recently submitted a paper to another journals. They have used the title of my journal paper in the subject line, right over there, right? So if I submit a paper to this journal, I will automatically get a research award. Okay, so for most of us, we can immediately identify these emails are phishing emails. So we're going to immediately send these emails to our trash can. But I have realized that that's not always the case for some of our rookie researchers. I know a PhD student who was bragging about a keynote speech at a conference in his LinkedIn page. Of course, I can see that the conference was a questionable or fake conference, but apparently the students was not aware of it, what he has committed. So who are these predatory publishers? predatory publishers are the revenue-seeking companies that manage and organize journals and conferences that unprofessionally exploit us, researchers, for their own profit. Their main driver is profit or revenue generation. They have zero care about the scholarship or the connection or communication of the real science or real research results. But unfortunately, based on New York Times article, the number of predatory journals has increased to more than 10,000 in recent years. That's based on 2017 data. So we have more than 10,000 predatory journals today. And apparently there is a profitable market with a lot of customers. That's why this business is thriving. And actually it is happening in our field. We are the victims. Some of you might have attended this conference, International Conference on Computing in Civil and Building Engineering. I actually attended conference with my students, but unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the conference was delivered in a virtual setting, right? We know the history of this conference. We know the organizers of this conference. So this is a legitimate conference, right? We want to participate, to share our research findings with our community. But unfortunately, there was the same name. There was a conference with the exact same name last year, International Conference on Computing in Civil and Building Engineering, and last year, and it was held in Australia, okay? And this one was organized by so-called WASET, the World Academy of Science and Technology, which is a really notorious organization in academia. They organize thousands of conferences using exactly the same name in any discipline. And look at this, right? It was offered in Australia last year, and some years later, you may recognize this conference name, ICCCBE 2020, but you may forget which city was the host city of this conference. So a person may attend this fake conference of like 30 or 40 people crammed in one room in a hotel room. No one knows each other, and make a short presentation with the title of keynote speech or invited speech. And some later, you can get credit for making having a paper published in this ICCEB 2020, right? And for those of you who attended yesterday's business meeting, you know that the Texas A&M and University of Nevada are going to co-host this international conference on construction engineering and project management 2020 in Las Vegas, Nevada from June 20, right? There's a history in this conference. This conference has been in existence for more than almost 20 years. We know the organizers, so this is a legitimate conference. But unfortunately, this WASET is operating the same name conference, ICCPM, exact same name in Paris, France. And even the conference dates are almost similar in June 24th. Obviously, this is a fake conference. I hope that you are not going to attend this conference. I hope that you can attend our conference that will be held in Las Vegas. And this is sort of a joke, but you can attend our legit conference, and this conference ends on June 23rd, and you can fly to Paris next day, and you can attend this fake conference. This is the situation we are in. This is not a remote issue that other disciplines need to worry about. This is actually happening in our community, and we need to figure out what is real, what is fake. So how do they do their business? This is their typical business model. As you saw, those phishing emails, they do aggressive marketing by bombarding emails sending those emails to us to submit our papers with the offers like keynote speech, invited speaker, and an editorial board member. And their business model is 100% order pays business model, which means you need to pay the fee, a hefty fee, under the name of the review process and online publications. I have heard a case that a publisher charges like $3,500 for the processing fee. And some publishers charge additional fee if you want to withdraw your manuscript. You realize that the journal that you submit your paper to is a predatory journal, is too late. You need to pay additional fee to withdraw your manuscript. Obviously, the paper review process is extremely pure and fast from using these incompetent reviewers. Typically, the review takes less than a week or less than 10 days. And if you participate as a reviewer, you may get a discount voucher so that you can, they will ask you to submit your manuscript to their journal with a discounted fee. It's like you pay for, and get the next one and 50% off. That's like their business model. And from the time from submission to publication is less than 30 to 40 days. Look at this. I'm not talking about the time from submission to acceptance. It's not about the submission to acceptance. It takes less than 30 to 40 days from submission to official publication, because their publication model is 100% online. And obviously almost all of those manuscripts are accepted by those journals. I understand the movements and the rise of this online publication. I'm all for it. This is great. The purpose is great, right? The quick dissemination of research findings to the research community. But these open journals, the open publications have created this opportunity for these predatory publishers to play their games and create this poisonous environment for us. So what are the consequences? The consequences are very severe. These publishers are creating and expanding an ecosystem of pseudoscience, right? With the online publications in the internet. Now, real research and pseudo research are presented as legitimate in literature. We don't want our postdocs, graduate students to cite these pseudo research results. And more importantly, we don't want our grad students to follow pseudo research processes that they will see from these pseudo publications. And once you're going to publish your research in these predatory journals, obviously your reputation will be seriously tainted and your integrity will be seriously questioned. It will have a long-lasting impact in your career. So what should be our response to protect our scholarly work and to keep our community healthy? I have seen that some disciplines and some institutions have started to create like evaluation rubric like this. And this is a very simple thing because it is based on common sense. So if we're gonna use like a simple table, the criteria like this, it will help our faculty, our graduate students to understand and the quality of the publishers and which conferences we need to submit our research work to. And there is also a global level academic initiatives on this issue. And this thinkchecksummit.org is one of them. I'd like to encourage you to visit this website, www.thinkchecksummit.org. And what they are promoting is very simple. It's a 3-step process. Think before you submit your research, whether you are submitting your research to a trusted journal or publisher. And you're going to use their checklist, which has only 7 items. It has only 7 items. It's a very simple process. You're going to go through this checklist. And if you can say yes to all of them, you are safe to submit your research to that specific journal or to that specific campus. Very simple process. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Chema. Chema, are you there?
Yes, I was trying to unmute my cell phone. This, I think David has provided a reality check. And what I want to do with my presentation is to give you two real examples of complete disregard of ethics. And I'm using my own two papers because it doesn't get any more personal than that. And so can you please advance? And you may not be able to read this, but if the slides are made available, you can then verify this. The first example, I'm going to show you two examples, and these are from two papers of mine. The column on the left is a paper that I published in the Journal of Construction Engineering and Management in 2005. And the title of the paper is Critical Path Method with Multiple Calendars. And again, was published in 2005. And I just giving you one paragraph from my paper that in that slide. On the right column, there is a paper that was found. And the title, I didn't want to provide identifying information for the journal or the authors, because that's not the point of today's session. And I didn't want to further shame those authors in that journal. I just wanted to show you real evidence that happens with total disregard. So the new title of the paper that was found 5 years later in 2010 says, a theory of critical path with multiple calendars. So they slightly changed the title, and then they replace my co-author and I, and they put their names as the co-authors, and they copy the paper entirely, not just one paragraph. Right now, I'm giving you one paragraph as evidence of how word by word this paragraph was copied. Well, they copied the whole paper. They just changed the title and they replaced our names with their names. So this is not, if we have run the authenticate software on this paper, authenticate would have returned a 100% plagiarism because the papers are identical. You see the title on the right, it says withdrawn, because that just simply tells you that I filed a complaint, and ASCE, the staff in ASCE worked diligently to work with this predatory journal, and they were forced to retract that paper because we showed them, ASCE did, that the two papers were copy and pasted identically. So even though it's a predatory journal, they were forced to withdraw and retract that paper. Can you go to the next slide, David, please? This is a second example of another paper of mine. another paper of mine. The title of the real paper, it's Evaluation of the Resource Constrained Critical Path Method Algorithms. So what we did in this paper, we looked at 7 or 8 algorithms that had been developed and published to perform resource constrained CPM. So this paper really is a literature review paper. We published this paper in 2005, also in the Journal of Construction Engineering and Management, also by the same co-author, Kyung-Ju Ham Kim, who got his PhD soon after we published this paper. On the right, you see another paper published in the year 2009, 4 years later, and the title of the paper is Literature Review in Resource-Constrained Critical Path Method Algorithms. Once again, the whole paper was duplicated. They just deleted, they changed the title, they deleted our names, and they put their names on it. And the paper was published by a different outlet. This one is in Europe. The previous one that I was showing you was an Asian publisher. This one is in Europe. The authors of both papers, of both examples, are the same authors. So this clan of authors, and there are 3 of them, found it very efficient to publish by simply finding a paper they liked, changing the title, put the names on it, their names on as authors, find a predatory journal, pay their fees or whatever they had to do, and get it published. This paper has also been retracted. ASCE flexed their muscle and spoke with this predatory journal, and the paper has been retracted as well. ASCE did find that this paper, the one example number 2, has been already cited 3 times. These are not recent cites, but back in 2009, 10, and 11, this paper was cited 3 times. Not my paper, but this fake paper. So I wanted to give you 2 examples that are close to home. It doesn't get any closer to home than these 2 examples, because these are 2 papers of mine, to show you that what's possible. And this shows, as I said, a total disregard for any ethical standard. This borders on criminal activity. And so to conclude my presentation, I'd like to simply say that in the Journal of Construction Engineering and Management, we have in my tenure as chief editor, we have retracted 1 paper. In my whole tenure as chief editor, we retracted 1 paper because it was so bad that there was no other option but to retract the paper. It was, the authenticate was 80, 90%. And the other paper was published first. So the journal published this paper after the other paper. So it was our duty and responsibility to retract the paper. So that's 1 paper in my tenure as chief editor. And right now we have a second paper that is under investigation. We have 1 paper that is under investigation. We still don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we have a paper under investigation. So I wanted to lend credit to David's points that he made on his opening presentation by giving you two real examples of two papers of mine that have been copied and pasted literally and figuratively, and by telling you that the Journal of Construction Engineering and Management is not immune to these cases. And we have retracted one paper and we have a second one under investigation. Thank you for your time. I will remain here in the panel and gladly take your comments and questions when we open up the Q&A session. So David, back to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Chema, for sharing your personal experience. That must have been a very, very unpleasant experience that all of us don't want to have, obviously. So I'm going to turn it over to the next panelist, show presentation, Jeong Kwak from George Washington.
Thank you, David. So I'm going to talk about two things. One, briefly about the scholarship assessment, and the second about various examples of unethical practices and incidents, which I was able to get it from the ASCE General Department. So I'm going to show some examples of it. And, these are all because part of the reason is that, we are living in the hyper world. Everybody is into research. They all need to disseminate their knowledge by publishing papers, and there is a pressure from everywhere, to get tenure and to get promotion and all that. So it's unfortunate, but there is a huge temptation of that. Next page. So first, I'm going to briefly talk about the differences in scholarship assessment and the evaluation. And we are mainly talking about in the engineering world, the civil engineering, or in the construction management world. And then it's pretty straightforward, even though there are different weights into it. They look into probably one of the most critical things they look into is the external funding from the very well-known funding agencies, or publish in the conferences. Some conference papers definitely count, not all of them, but some will count. Publishing in the journal articles in the reputable journals. And when they come with the time for the evaluation, they look at various factors, such as impact factors, such as citations, and many other means to evaluate the scholar's assessment. So that is usually the engineering school model. I happen to actually be in a business school environment for over 20 years. So I know a little bit about how the business school, and they actually operate very, very differently. Their whole evaluation, their scholarship evaluation, their productivity, it's totally different than the engineering school. And I, in fact, remember when I first moved into the business school, I had to adjust my way of thinking very differently because their criteria was radically different. So in the business school, there are like set up very few top so-called top journals or A+ journals out there. That, and then if you publish say 3 or 4 in your 5-6 year term, then you will get tenure. So it's very different. So then how do they come with those top journals? This is driven by ranking primarily, because business school, their life and death depends on the rankings that the, unfortunately not by them, but the outside world, such as Financial Times, Business Week's, U.S. News and World Report. There are many different publications, commercial publications that evaluate the business school's ranking somehow with their own criteria. And there's always a big portion which is called scholarship. And for example, Financial Times, they come up with 50 journals in all the field of business school. And, for example, if you're accounting faculty member, then there will be 3 or 4 top accounting journals. And if you can get 3, maybe 4 in 6 years, then you get tenure. Not like having 20 or 30 of them. But getting into that and getting published in that journal is very difficult. The acceptance rate would be around 5% or even less. So it's like, similar to the grant writing in the engineering school, that it's very difficult to get a grant. in a top organization similar to that. UT Dallas even make it even sure there's a thing ranking called UT Dallas ranking, and they only look into 24 journals. So that's all in the entire business school discipline, from finance, accounting, operation management to entrepreneurship. There are only 24 journals. They mingle it all together. And if you can publish there, then you are being rewarded. If not, then all the other A-, B+, B journals, because they want to rank them, are useless kind of way. And then there are other rankings out there, and I mentioned that briefly yesterday, that our journal, along with JCEM, was also ranked in those other business school journals, like in the UK Association of Business School and others. So, this is a whole discussion we can have. Hopefully there will be some discussion later on whether we should take this model. I think it's pretty radical, but this is one way to look into this. So, just to give you a summary on this scholarship thing, that we all think that the business school, they are very relevant to the real world business, but in fact, the practice and the academia are even more separated than the engineering school or in the construction or the architecture world, because whatever they do, it's on their own, and then the business world is on their own. So they don't really mingle much as we think that they do more. Next slide. So these are the stuff that I got from the ASCE journal publication. I reached out to the ASCE journal publications and give me some examples. And these are the 5 things that basically they give examples: dual submissions, author review of fraud, publication fraud, dual publication, and plagiarism. Next page. So first is a dual submission. So this one is that the author submit the same paper to multiple journals or multiple ASCE journals. You always think that, there's always, when you submit the paper to the journal, they said, you're, guaranteeing that this is only be reviewed for this particular journal until you get whatever the decision, and we click on it. But in reality, it seems that some authors actually submit the same papers to many different journals. In the ASCE journal department, they run a duplication submission check, and if it overlaps, then we will get a notification. If the non-ASCE journal also get a similar one, and if the reviewer happens, because interestingly enough, we know that the reviewer pool is very large, but with a specific field, it's very, very small. So then the reviewer will get the same papers from 2 different journals, and then they will report back to the editor. So that happens. So that would be a one big sort of a no with the dual submission. And, I guess these things happen, not happen a lot, but these things happen. And in most cases, these papers would be declined. Next page. So this is from one of the ASCE dual submissions, which I got it. What is from the JME, the Journal of Management Engineering. One is from the Environmental Engineering. And looking at the abstract itself, one was case study, one was technical paper, and it seems that it was the same material. The abstract itself, probably 85–90% were the same. And this was actually flagged by the ASCE. And then, we say that this is an immediate decline, and the authors have notified. Next page. Another example would be author review of fraud. So this is the one that author suggests the reviewer, and then the real person who is an expert in the field, and editor has a right to accept or not select that person as a reviewer. And then the author will provide a fake email address, a similar email address or a Gmail address, a very similar last name or first name. It looks like the author, but it's different. Then that paper will, if the editor do not know whether this that individual, then decide to use the author preferred or reviewer, then that paper will directly go to the author, him or herself, and him or herself will review his or her own paper. And then, the people accept it, and then we retract it. And so nowadays, I think ASCE is making it much more difficult to just make sure that, editor should actually be in charge. The that email is a legitimate email or not. Sometimes, depending on the country you live, they might use different email, not the institution email. So you need to be very careful about that because these things happen. The worst thing is that the same author includes several references to his or her own work in the initial submission. And at each revision, he adds more of his own paper. So at the end, without even editor knowing it, you found out that that initial, after 2 revisions, you found out that that author suddenly referred 30 more of his or his own paper itself. So that is definitely a no, but that was one way of actually trying to beat the system. Next page. This one is called reviewer self-citation. So this is another tough one, and this happens more, that the reviewer noted the addition of several self-citations, and when reviewers add citations to their own work, and this could possibly reveal the identity of the review to the author. Well, sometimes we purposely send to the most expert, and the expert, if that some of those seminar papers are not cited, then it's okay to recommend that these papers should be read or be referred, or at least have a look at it. And it happens to be your paper, that's fine. But in some instances, reviewer basically give 10, 15 of his or her own paper and say, these papers are not cited. You need to cite this paper if you want to get another round of revision. And that is absolutely no. And there is a obligations of reviewers in ASCE, and the Committee on Publication Ethics also note that that should not happen. Next page. Next one is a publication fraud. So this is a criminal kind of thing, that the authors will contact ASCE why their paper was not published in a recent issue. And actually, I received a couple of letters saying that, I received a letter from ASCE that my paper was accepted. When it's going to be shown in whatever the issue? It says, I don't know. And then he will provide more information. Then author will basically send ASCE or an editor a fake acceptance letter. And this was happening in other countries, unfortunately. So it's a PDF with a fake journal letter editor saying that the paper was accepted and will be published in such and such issue with a forged signature of my signature. And then what ASCE wants is to have authors avoid this scam. And this happened, I think, 4 or 5 years ago for a few times. And it seems that the authors in those overseas, basically, I don't know what happened, but they maybe delegate their reviewing process to some other parties, and then they receive that letter. And so, and then said, when is my paper going to be published? Next page. So this is actually example of fake acceptance letter that I received. ASCE letterhead with journal acceptance letter with my name, with somebody's signature. And then there are 2 examples of that. So it's kind of, we don't receive this letter. We receive everything by email these days. So this is, and then they say, where is my paper? I have not seen it. Next page. And then some other incidences actually, they would not contact me back or the ASCE back, but they will submit whatever the paper to the editorial manager saying that this is the final version of the accepted paper. Well, we have not even seen the initial paper, and they thought that it was accepted, so they want to now submit it to the editorial manager and saying that this is the final version, please accept this paper. It's hard to believe, but these things happen. Next page. Another thing is that your publication. And this one often happens when unfortunately, The paper is published by different journals, and the reader, the author, the scholar, the reviewer, and editor will inform ASCE that a paper has been published, that is very similar to the one that is already published. I think in Chema's case, Chema maybe found out, or some others maybe let Chema know that somebody was somebody basically stole his whole material. But these things usually happen. So in this case, this is, I think, the worst thing, that it should never happen. This is a criminal activity. And if that happens, then ASCE will immediately retract the paper itself. Next page. Plagiarism is another one. I think Kerry is going to discuss more about that, so I won't talk much about it. But unfortunately, this is a very difficult area. I know that you all want to publish more papers in respective journals, but and then oftentimes the difficult part is a self-plagiarism, which is difficult to assess and evaluate. But these things happen. Because of the software that we have these days, such as Authenticate, these things could be very well captured these days. You'll be surprised how much work behind the system that try to capture the plagiarism activity, but these things happen. Next page. So I want to briefly talk about self-plagiarism about a minute, which is basically a text recycling, because you probably have worked on a funded research project, and you think that you can probably publish 3 different papers of it, but some of the literature review might be same, some of the things might be same, and there is no sort of a clear citations or anything like that. And if it's just a clear text recycling, then that would be a problem. And the Committee on Publication Ethics, again, the COP clearly mentioned that that should not happen. It's more difficult to evaluate it, but I had a couple of incidences that the authors basically self-citate, self-text, they recycle their text from other journals. And this is an example, next page, without even referring to the previous one, but it's, I think, the same setting, and then they just did it. So they had 2 or 3, 4 of them, and then I asked the ASCE reach out to the author to explain it. Explanation was not sufficient, so I said, I'm sorry, but it's going to be an immediate reject. So these things should not happen. Next page. So I briefly talk about a couple of examples of these things that happen. And these are the references. Next page. So ASCE has a guide for authors, and I'm sure that you might at least read it once when you first submit a paper. But I think these things is worthwhile of a reading. There is a broad perspective on plagiarism, and actually Journal of Environmental Engineering in 2015, the editor had a very long sort of editorial note about that. So that might be a good reference to read, what is a plagiarism, what is not, and you should be careful about keeping and defending your academic integrity. And then, in a more general term, the Committee on Publication Ethics, they have a full series of those items related to plagiarism and recycling and unethical practices and all that. So this is a very, I think, a timely and needed discussion that we should have. But because I'm seeing more and more of this, luckily. For JME, I was not being able to, retract any of the papers, but I think that retraction is becoming more and more often, unfortunately, and there is a temptation. And sometimes the advisors might not even know about it, because if you work together with the graduate students or doctoral students or master students, they are the one who wants to have another paper, get another paper out, and without even knowing that there has been a full sort of a activity going on, then you could be a victim in yourself. So you should be very careful when you submit papers to the journal outlets. I'll stop here and then hand it to Kay. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jeong, for your great presentation and lots of examples. And I think that some of the examples are really shocking to me and unimaginable from our standard. But this it is so sad to see that that is actually happening, even though it must be a rare case. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Dosick. Carrie?
Great, thank you. So I'm going to finish the panel and I think echo some of the things that have already been discussed, but kind of perhaps wrap it up and summarize our the thoughts about plagiarism and definitions around plagiarism. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So plagiarism occurs when you use others' words, ideas, assertions, data, or figures and do not acknowledge that you have done so. Next slide. So I just committed plagiarism. I used those words and those were not my words. Those words came from a handbook from MIT. And so the correct way to share those thoughts, right, is to quote directly using quotes and then citing the source of that information. So I think most people can recognize that kind of plagiarism where we're copying direct words from someone else, right? That's a carbon copy and that's pretty clear. But plagiarism, as we've seen here, can get a little less clear and murky, particularly around what Jeong just talked about in terms of self-plagiarism. It's like, well, it's my stuff. Why can't I reuse and recycle? So let's continue on this next slide, please. So let's start with use others' words. The definition of using others' words is defined by the use of more than 4 words borrowed from a source. You must quote if you're using more than 4 words. So that is kind of the technical definition, if you will. Next. Let's talk about ideas and assertions next. So phrasing others' ideas is also plagiarism. And Chema gave us, really intense examples of that, right? That he found these other papers had actually used his own ideas, rephrasing them and using the entire paper to do so. Quite extraordinary. So phrases or summarize acceptability and cite the source. So even if you're taking ideas, you still want to cite the source of those ideas. Next, please. All right, so datas and figure. I used 2 interesting figures here to kind of talk about what that means. You clearly can't copy someone's figure, but could you recreate that figure? Well, perhaps if you cite the source of those figures and those ideas. So here we have this spectrum of plagiarism. On the one side, kind of this deliberate stealing or borrowing others' work or paying someone else to create work that you then publish under your own name is also discouraged. And on that side of plagiarism spectrum, working with other students to complete an individual task is also considered plagiarism. In the middle there, and reusing your work you have done in earlier assignments. So this extends both to beyond kind of journal and conference paper work, but also to individual assignments in the academic setting. And then on the left-hand side there, copying work from a source without citation is what we typically think of as plagiarism, and using a source too closely when paraphrasing. I find students do this quite frequently as they're trying to capture the ideas and they feel like, well, somebody else wrote it so much better than I'll just kind of copy and rephrase. That's very strongly discouraged. You want to ingest and include those information and be able to articulate it for yourself or cite sources. If you think someone else's phrasing is perfect, well, quote from that phrase and cite them. That's completely appropriate. Next. I thought this was really interesting, and I think is a nice summary of what others have also talked about here in terms of the ASCE journals in particular. Here, this is an analysis of 331 retracted papers from the fields of chemistry, material science, and engineering. And we can see from this analysis that 40% were withdrawn from plagiarism. And you can see in the graph there on the lower right that there is plagiarism of others as well as self-plagiarism. There's also issues around other authorship issues related to missing authors, lack of authorization, clear authorship. There's honesty issues, theoretical errors or experimental errors or work not reproducible. And there's data issues, problematic data, falsified data, data ownership and disclosure. So I think under ethics and more broadly, I think all of these categories could be included under ethics. Next. So to finish off, we're dealing with plagiarism, but we're also dealing with copyright. So I thought it would be useful to kind of explore these two definitions. And interestingly, on this slide, I didn't put down, oh, Oxford English, it's at the top there. So the citation is coming from Oxford English Dictionary. The first is that the action or practice of taking someone else's work, idea, etc., and passing it off as one's own, also known as literary theft. And copyright is something else again, and that it's the exclusive right given by law for a certain term of years to an author, composer, designer, etc., for his, her, or their assignee to print, publish, and sell copies of his, her, or their original work. So while plagiarism is stealing, copyright is an issue that we also need to consider and falls into this kind of ethics, in that if you're trying to use something that's been published, then that has a copyright assignment to it. Not necessarily a quote, but perhaps a figure is definitely an issue around copyright. So something to also keep in mind. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to the panel discussion, and the chat's been busy, so we'll have a lot to talk about.
Thank you, Carrie, for your excellent presentation as well. So I'm going to open up this virtual room for meaningful discussions and Q&A. Yes, we have a lot of comments and questions in the chat box already. I didn't have time to go through those questions yet. But I think that what we can do is we have about 110 attendees in this virtual room. And I think we might be able to allow you to directly ask your question by unmuting your microphone. And if you could use the raise hand function in the reaction in the bottom bar, and I will allow you to ask questions. So let's do this. I think this is a hot topic that we are all interested in. So I'm going to give you some time to think about what question you want to ask to our panel. And meanwhile, I mean, I will ask sort of a general question to our panel members first, and then we will go through the chat box. And if there are people who raise their hands, we will allow them to ask questions. And we have 30 minutes before we turn it over to the keynote speakers of the award winners. So I think we have, time is not an issue with us. So the first question that I want to ask to our panel members is this. So what kind of advice can you give to our PhD students, postdocs, and junior faculty members who are pressured to publish more and faster? Does the publication number really matter? Or some people argue that since the quality assessment is difficult and subjective, quantity can be used as an unbiased indicator. What is your opinion on that?
I might jump in. I think I have a fairly strong opinion. I myself am more privileged quality over quantity. When I do a review, I'm looking at the papers and really trying to assess the quality of the research and scholarship. And I think that I think it was someone had a slide in this panel that talked about that, I think, David, maybe it was one of your slides, in terms of its national reputation as well as the number of articles. So, but I would recommend for anyone in any situation to check in with the people who will be doing the reviewing. So I may have a strong opinion about quality, but others may have more weight on the numbers. And so I think working with mentors within your institution and mentors across the country and internationally, where you can connect to them, continuing to have those conversations with people that are in your network to understand what the culture is and the expectations are, because I understand that in some contexts, those numbers are really important for the reviewers. And so I think while I might have an individual, passion for quality, I think others may privilege the numbers, or there might need to be a balance between a certain number, a target, and the quality of work that's coming out of that.
Well, the very straight piece of advice I give students and young faculty is that there is no shortcut to a contribution to the body of knowledge. There is no shortcut. So if that means that we need to take the longer route, so be it. Don't take shortcuts.
I think both quality and quantity both matters, but again, as Kerry and Chema already mentioned, that there is no shortcut. You have to do your diligence, do due diligence. You have to do your work. You cannot publish papers in 1 week or 2 weeks. That is not possible.
Recording in progress.
So at the same time, also the quality matters as well. I am also the one who also looks into quality, who try to read the paper when there is a case of that. Because quality also matters. I know some committee or the senior faculty members want to quantify everything quality by looking at the impact factors, quality by looking at the citations, but that's not it. There are different type of qualities, whether the research is impactful to the practical side of it. So it's, and then when you go up to that stage, that you have to remember that the committee that are looking at your work, your 5-6 years of work, will basically look into that 360-degree evaluation. So I think everything it matters itself.
Thank you, Kerry, Chema, and Jeong, for sharing your perspectives on this quantity or the number of the publications. We have 2 hands here, and I'm gonna let Bahare Alizadeh to ask a question. So could you unmute your microphone?
My name is Alizadeh, and I'm a PhD student at Texas A&M University. I had a question about reviewing for journals. Recently, I was selected to serve as a reviewer for a journal. And while I was reviewing the paper, I recognized that the submitted paper is completely the same as another paper that I had read before. So my question was that, what if I had not read the paper before? Do reviewers also have the responsibility to recognize the plagiarism and report it to the journal? Or the journal should do it with specific software before handing it over to the reviewers? And if the fact that the journal did not detect the plagiarism at first indicate that is a predatory journal. Thank you.
Can I take my first pass at this? That's a very important point that you make. Thank you for that observation. Let me say 2 things. The most important one is that we rely a great deal on the reviewers like you to tell us, the editors, I have reviewed this paper. I have seen this paper before. So that happens a lot, and we continue to rely a great deal on reviewers to alert us of these situations. Secondly, ASCE, when you submit a paper to ASCE, the original submission is not sent through Authenticate. It's not, for cost reasons. There is no point in sending this original submission through Authenticate if that paper is going to undergo a desk reject. If that paper was so bad that it was going to be desk rejected, there was an unnecessary expense. The first time that ASCE runs the Authenticate software to determine the amount of overlap with other publications is when the paper comes back as R1, revision number 1. So ASCE is fully aware of this situation, but it's a matter of dollars and cents. There are the Journal of Construction Engineering and Management. Last year, we received close to 1,600 papers, the highest ever. Half of those papers are desk rejects. There is a lot of bad papers out there, terrible bad papers, that they are dead on arrival. And so ASCE has made the decision not to run the software until it comes back as R1. And I'd like to make just another important point from my point of view. I got power. We had lost power at Clemson. I got power back and I'm no longer on my cell phone.
Yay. Well, you also.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
That's great. Carrie, do you want to say something or can I move on to the next question?
I don't think I have anything more to say other than I'll just say that the journals I'm involved in, the Engineering Project Organization Journal and the Construction Management and Economics Journal, are both similar, right? That we're relying on the whole community to help identify these issues, and so bring them forward whenever you see them in whichever part of the process you are, right? If you're a reader and you're seeing an issue, bring it to our attention. If you're a reviewer, bring it to our attention. So I think we're very much, this is a community-wide concern, and I think we all should feel like we're participating in it at all the levels.
Sure, that's right. I see another hand, Mohammed Fahi. I'm sorry, I don't see your last name's letters there. Mohammed, could you unmute your microphone and ask your question to us?
Thank you. I am Faizan from University of Toronto. I'm a grad student. I have a simple question regarding citing a figure, for example, or like if I am citing a figure from some other paper and I feel like to further explain the figure, I have to edit something. Is that allowed? Or like, do we need author's consent before that?
Let me try to keep stab that one. I think you need to clearly cite that you are referring that particular table or figure itself, and you are adopting it. And I will stop there. And I don't know whether you need actual author's consent for that because it's already the author's publication. But without that clear citation, that it could be a possible plagiarism.
It depends on, I think it depends on what you're doing with it, but I've often seen adapted from citation, right? So that's a way to cite is that you're adding inside the parentheses adapted from and then the citation, so that you're acknowledging the original work, but also acknowledging your addition to the original work.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
There was actually a question at the beginning of the chat that I thought was interesting, following on, David, your question in that, or your presentation in that, has the original conference organizers looked into taking legal action against the fake conference organizers? Do you know if, because I know you're involved in the first example?
Yes, I saw the question, so I was going to go through those questions in the chat box a little later, but yeah,
Oh,
that
sorry.
was yeah, that's an important one, but I mean, and I don't think we have resources and we have time to aggressively address those issues, right? And to be honest with you, we don't need to have this panel discussion if all of our committee members stick with at least at a minimum level acceptable ethical standards, because there are some, I mean, we have some bad apples out there, and there are the companies that want to exploit our sort of a hidden desire that we have, right? That business is driving out there. So that's a really important questions. But I don't have any. I don't know whether the ASCE's, the publication department, is thinking of suing some of those predatory journals and like that. But I don't know what would be the right answer for that. We are just individualized, and we spend most of our time in conducting research and teaching our students, and right, and getting involved in this kind of professional service activities. And does anyone have some ideas how we can defend our community against those predatory publishers?
Well, I have a suggestion, and let me preface these suggestions by saying that I am not an attorney, and I'm not a trademark expert either, but it seems to me that if we start trademarking the names and acronyms of our conferences, then we will have a stronger case to be made against those who are stealing our trademarks. That's just a thought from a very naive point of view.
So someone needs to take a legal action against those predatory publishers, right? And it is, I mean, this was said, the World Academy of Science and Technology. I have just learned that there's a notorious company that runs like thousands of conferences using exactly the same conference names, but somehow the company has been doing okay, right? They haven't been, I don't know their legal history, but as far as I know, they have not been sued by any professional societies, and we are really a small organizations, right? And
so let me try to take a step on that one. So that organization, it's, I think, outside the United States. So if you want to sue that organization, it will be very difficult to sue it because it is outside the territory of US. But as you said, they copy and paste thousands of conferences from engineering, from science, from civil, from construction, you name it. So I think that we have to be sure that we defend our discipline, and maybe ask the mentor, ask your colleagues whether this is a legitimate conference or not. And by not submitting there, that would be, doing our part, because if not, then they will make money. So I think they're following, I don't know if you guys remember or not, but there was a parent company called Forever 21 or Forever 16. I forgot that company. That they copy every new fashion clothes in about a week that came out, and all the big companies sued that company, and they said, let the legal action go on. We'll make money. We'll go to the next one. And they made a lot of money of that. Now they are bankrupt last year, finally. So I think they're taking that kind of strategy, so to speak. But I think from our part, we need to really make sure that we don't submit papers to those places.
Thank you, Jeong. So we have a question from Cristina Torres. Yes.
Hi, I'm Cristina Torres Maki. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. And I would like to get the panel's thoughts about impact factors and how reliable is that as a measure of quality. I feel sometimes very well-recognized journals in the field may not necessarily have a high impact factor. And for a junior faculty, I would like to get your thoughts on how to better strategize on where to publish and how to identify the most relevant journals where we should address our publications to.
Let me start. The impact factor, goes up and down every year. And actually, to mentioning to the third decimal point, I think it's a joke in some cases, but we still look at that. I think that's one criteria out of many to look into it. But in the business school, for example, we always joke that there are a lot of junk journals that has a high impact factor. So again, you want to ask your colleague, ask your mentors, ask where others have published, and then that would be the more reputable journal than just simply following the impact factor, because those will go up and down and those will have different numbers, and it's just one out of many different criteria. So I know that some countries outside, like in the Asian countries or other places, they follow it very closely, but I think that has to be changed.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeong.
No, go ahead, carry on.
Oh, well, I just wanted to follow up and say I agree with that. And it's really important to check with your community where your assessment is going to take place, because I think I've been in some review settings where we're really looking at the quality of the journals that we know, and so we're basing it on the reputations of the journals, not the impact factor. But I know in recent years, impact factor seems to have gotten more important. And I know from a colleague that's working in the UK, they've started to create metrics at the national level where all of their CVs get fed through these metrics. And those metrics the impact factors start becoming more important when you're kind of metricifying the process. So I think the context of where you are is really important. So understanding that, and if impact factor is important, well, I think you just have to be strategic and go with the higher impact factors until you get through the promotion process, and then you can be more open. I know for the Engineering Project Organization Journal, we've really struggled as a starting journal. We're only about 10 years old, and that journal is struggling because we weren't on the radar in terms of impact factor, and so we just went through the Scopus process and now have become Scopus approved. So now we'll get that impact factor, and I'm not quite sure where we'll hit, and we don't have the number coming back yet. So we've recognized that it's pretty important for the journal to kind of be in having the impact factor to be part of the promotion tenure process, or even at beginning the job market, right? The people are starting to really pay attention to that, and that's important for young junior members of our community. So, Gemma?
Well, let me just add to these points that the impact factor is quite a simple ratio, which is exactly the number of citations for the journal over 2 years, on papers to the journal over 2 years, divided by the total number of papers. That's it. And we need a supercomputer to get 3 decimal points, right? So that's, for those of you who were not familiar with the calculation, that's how the impact factor is developed. The most important comment, Christina, is that the narrower the scope of the journal, the higher the impact factor is going to be. Just in generally speaking, if you look at journals that are whose scope is very narrow, those journals tend to have a higher impact factor because the readership of these narrow boutique type journals, the readership will tend to cite those papers because they are so, their contribution is in such a specific field that's why they get the citations, the numerator up so high, divided by the number of papers, the denominator. The broader the scope of the journal in general, the lower the impact factor. So I think from my perspective, if you look at the impact factor of the Journal of Construction Engineering and Management, what's important is that it has an upward trajectory. The scope has not changed. It has remained the same scope for the last 60 years, but the impact factor has monotonically increased. That speaks volumes about the quality, even though the absolute number is smaller than other journals that have a narrower scope. So I just wanted to offer those two pieces of information.
Yes. So along this line of thought, in terms of the journal impact factor and the perceived reputation of the journals, right? Just like the Jeong talked about in his presentation, we see that the business school operates in a very different way in assessing their faculty members' academic achievements or not the meaningful knowledge creation. So is it time for our community to develop like a tiered system of journals and keep assessing the quality of the available journals in our community? Or at least would it be a good idea that we as a community, as a CRC community, at least endorse some journals? Okay, these journals are acceptable, at least acceptable journals to allow our researchers to publish our research. Would it be a good idea?
Let me start first. As I experiences in the business school, I don't think there's a clear answer to that, but I'm against endorsing any of those specific journals. We all know which outlets are the good one, the best one, and it's all widely known. But once we start endorsing few journals, then everybody will try to publish there, and other journals might suffer, and then that whole knowledge creation and dissemination might not go in the right way. So I am against that. And then the business school is also looking ways to look at from different perspective, because it's all about A journals, all about A-star journals, and other work is not really appreciated or counted in a way. So, and then again, in this construction and in the civil engineering and architecture and relevant area, we look at other areas too. The teaching, we look at the scholarship, we look at the fund raising and all that. So it's not going to be as simple. Maybe having a set of it, but I think we already have a good set of journals that we could regard it as a good journal. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeong. We are running out of time, so I think we need to wrap up in the next 3 to 4 minutes. And we have a hand here, and we have a bunch of comments and questions in the chat box that we haven't gone through. This is what we can do. So I will make sure that I will go through all of these comments, and if there are some good questions, I will ask these questions to our panel members and get their written responses. And this video will be posted and available under the CRC, under the ASCE, CI, and CRC website, and we'll make sure that we will post our panel members' answers to each of these questions. I think we can. There was one hand in there, but I think that he has just disappeared. Okay, Barry Salmon. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, David. I just wanted to, it was not, it was more of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to, highlight open access journals are obviously more accessible because they're open access, and they articles published in those journals can get more citations just because they are more accessible. And that kind of may skew the impact factor discussion a little bit, I think. So there is also this discussion about predatory versus regular journals, and also open access versus more subscription-based journals that may be of importance to talk about. But I wanted to also mention one of the criteria, one of the problems you mentioned in the presentation was dual submission. And I think it's important to emphasize this is for obviously simultaneous submissions. It's many authors get sometimes rejections or sometimes get major revisions which they don't agree with, and they decide to submit their paper elsewhere after first round of review. But that wouldn't be considered dual submission as long as the paper is not considered anymore for that first journal. So for our younger audience, I wanted to mention that. So just as a clarification, but thank you for a great presentation and great panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Baris. So it's 1:27 in Central Time, so we have about 3 minutes left. So I think it's important for us to have a short break. Someone may need to have a bio break too. So let's wrap it up and have a short break. And we're gonna have excellent keynote speeches from the Research Award winners in our community. Let's do that. And I know we have a lot of questions and comments that we were not able to go through today. So but I'll make sure that I'll get written responses from our panel members. And if there is a continuous interest on it, we may be able to offer another panel discussion like this at in the future CRC events. All right, thank you so much for your interest, and thank you so much for your participation. You can stay here because we're gonna use the same Zoom link for keynote speeches. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David. David, could you assign Case as the co-host for next session? Case Mola is here. Already joined us.